The Sri Lankan independence movement was a peaceful political movement which aimed at achieving independence and self-rule for Sri Lanka, then Ceylon, for the British Empire. It was initiated around the turn of the 20th century and led mostly by the educated middle class. It succeeded when, on February 4, 1948, Ceylon was granted independence as the Dominion of Ceylon. Dominion status within the British Commonwealth was retained for the next 24 years until May 22, 1972, when it became a republic and was renamed the Republic of Sri Lanka. British colonial rule. The British Raj was dominant in Asia after the Battle of Assaye. Following the Battle of Waterloo, the British Empire became more influential. Its prestige was only briefly dented by setbacks in India, Afghanistan and South Africa. It was virtually unchallenged until 1914, the formation of the Batavian Republic in the Netherlands as an ally of the French Directory, led to a British attack on Ceylon in 1795 as part of England's war against the French Republic. The Kandyan Kingdom collaborated with the British expeditionary forces against the Dutch, as it had with the Dutch against the Portuguese. Once the Dutch had been evicted, the sovereignty ceded by the Treaty of Amiens and subsequent revolts in the Low Countries suppressed. The British began planning to capture the Kandyan Kingdom. The 1803 and 1804 invasions of the Kandyan provinces in the First Kandyan War were bloodily defeated. In 1815, the British fomented a revolt by the Kandyan aristocracy against the last Kandyan monarch and marched into uplands to depose him in the Second Kandyan War. The struggle against the colonial power began in 1817 with the UVA Rebellion, when the same aristocracy rose against British rule in a rebellion in which the villages participated. They were defeated by the occupiers. An attempt at rebellion sparked again briefly in 1830. The Kandyan peasantry were stripped of the lands by the Wastelands Ordinance, a modern enclosure movement, and reduced to penury. In 1848, the abortive Mattel rebellion, led by Henadij Francisco Fernando and Gonglegada Banda, was the first transitional step towards abandoning the feudal form of revolt, being fundamentally a peasant revolt. The masses were without the leadership of the native king or their chiefs. The leadership passed for the first time in the Kandyan provinces into the hands of ordinary people, non-aristocrats. The leaders were yeoman artisans, resembling the levelers in England's Revolution, and mechanics such as Paul Revere and Tom Paine, who were at the heart of the American Revolution. However, in the words of Kelvin de Silva, it had leaders but no leadership. The old feudalists were crushed and powerless. No new class capable of leading the struggle and heading it towards power had yet arisen. Plantation economy. In the 1830s, coffee was introduced into Sri Lanka, a crop which flourishes in high altitudes, and grown on the land taken from the peasants. The principal impetus to this development of capitalist production in Sri Lanka was the decline in coffee production in the West Indies, following the abolition of slavery there. However, the dispossessed peasantry were not employed on the plantations. The Kandyan villages refused to abandon the traditional subsistence holdings and become wage workers in the harsh conditions that prevailed on these new estates. Despite all the pressure exerted by the colonial state, the British therefore had to draw on its reserve army of labour in India to man its lucrative new outpost to the south. An infamous system of contract labour was established, which transported hundreds of thousands of Tamil coolies from southern India into Sri Lanka for the coffee estates. These Tamil labourers died in tens of thousands both on the journey itself as well as on the plantations. The coffee economy collapsed in the 1870s, when coffee blight ravaged the plantations, but the economic system it had created survived intact into the era of its successor, tea, which was introduced on a wide scale from 1880 onwards. Tea was more capital-intensive and needed a higher volume of initial investment to be processed, so that individual estate owners were now supplanted by large English consolidated companies based either in London or Colombo. Monoculture was thus increasingly capped by monopoly within the plantation economy. The pattern thus created in the 19th century remained in existence down to 1972. The only significant modification to the colonial economy was the addition of a rubber sector in the mid-country areas. The Buddhist resurgence and the 1915 riot. A new body of urban capitalists was growing in the Low Country, around transport, shopkeeping, distillery, plantation and woodwork industries. These entrepreneurs were from many castes and they strongly resented the historically unprecedented and un-Buddhistic practice of caste discrimination adopted by the Siam Nikaya in 1764, just 10 years after it had been established by a Thai monk. Around 1800 they organized the Amarapura Nikaya, which became hegemonic in the Low Country by the mid-19th century. The British attempt at giving a Protestant Christian education to the young men of the commercial classes backfired, as they transformed the Buddhism practiced in Sri Lanka into something resembling the nonconformist Protestant model. A series of debates against clergymen of the Methodist and the Anglican Church was organized, culminating in the defeat of the latter by modern logical argument. The Buddhist revival was aided by the Theosophists led by American Col. Henry Steele Olcott, who helped establish Buddhist schools such as Ananda College, Colombo, Dharmaraja College, Kandy, Malayadeva College, Karunagala, Mahinda College, Gaul, and Musaeus College, Colombo, at the same time injecting more modern secular Western ideas into the Protestant Buddhist thought stream. Dharmapala, 1915, and the Ceylon National Congress. Revivalists such as Anagrika Dharmapala started linking Protestant Buddhism to Sinhalese, creating a Sinhala Buddhist consciousness, linked to the temperance movement. This cut across the old barriers of caste, and was the beginnings of a pan-Sinhalese identity. It appealed in particular to small businessmen and yeomen, who now began to take center stage against the anglicized class of new elites created by the British rulers. The collaborationist comprador elements of the elite, led by S.W. R.D. Bandaranayake, F.R.C. Nanayake and D.S.C. Nanayake ganged up against the populists led by Dharmapala and removed him from the leadership of the temperance movement. A jolt was given to the British aura of invincibility by the German cruiser Emden, which attacked the seaport of Penang in Malaya, sinking a Russian cruiser, bombarded Madras and sailed unimpeded down the east coast of Sri Lanka. Such was its impact that, in Sri Lanka to this day, Emden is the bogeyman that mothers scare their children with, and the term is still used to refer to a particularly obnoxious person. In panic, the authorities jailed a Boer wildlife official H. Engelbrecht, after accusing him falsely of having supplied meat to the cruiser. The British rebuff at Gallipoli, fighting Asian Turks, also dented the British white supremacist sentiment. In 1915, commercial ethnic rivalry erupted into a riot in the Colombo against the Muslims, with Christians participating as much as Buddhists. The British reacted heavy-handedly, as the riot was also directed against them. Dharmapala had his legs broken and was confined to Jaffna. His brother died there. Captain D. E. Henry Pedros, a militia commander, was shot for mutiny. Inspector General of Police Herbert Daubigan became notorious for his methods. Hundreds of Ceylonese were arrested by the British colonial government during the riots of 1915. Those imprisoned without charges included future leaders of the independence movement, F.R.C. Nanayake, D.S.C. Nanayake, Anagrika Dharmapala, Dr. C.A. Huavitan, Arthur V. Diaz, H.M. Amara Surya, Dr. W.A. Da Silva, Baron Jaya Tilaka, Edwin Wijayaratna, A. Gunasinghe, John Silver, P.R. Daza Sarisana and others. Sir James Pearce initiated and drafted a secret memorandum with the support of Sir Ponam Balam Ramanathan and E.W. Pereira braved mine and submarine-infested seas to carry it in the soles of his shoes to the Secretary of State for the Colonies, pleading for the repeal of martial law and describing the atrocities committed by the police led by Abigan. The British government ordered the release of the leaders who were in detention. Several high officials were transferred. A new governor, Sir John Anderson, was sent to replace Sir Robert Chalmers with instructions to inquire and report to His Majesty's government. Newspapers such as the Morning Leader played a vital role to mould public opinion. In 1919 the Ceylon National Congress was founded to agitate for greater autonomy. It did not seek independence, however, representing the comprador elite which opposed Dharmapala. This same elite vigorously opposed the grant of universal suffrage by the Donoughmore Constitutional Commission. Dharmapala was hounded out of the country by a press campaign by the Lake House group of the Press Barandia, which Wardener. His mantle fell on the next generation, epitomized by Colvin da Silva, who was radicalized by Dharmapala's words, the youth leagues and the struggle for independence. The young people who stepped into the shoes of Dharmapala organized themselves into youth leagues, seeking independence and justice for Sri Lanka. The first moves came not from Dharmapala's ethnic group but from the Tamil youth of Jaffna. In 1924 the Jaffna Students' Congress, later renamed the Jaffna Youth Congress, was founded. Influenced by the Indian independence movement, it was secular and committed to Purana Swaraj, national unity and the eradication of inequalities imposed by caste. In 1927, the JYC invited Indian independence movement leader Gandhi to visit Jaffna. The JYC led successful boycott of the first state council elections in Jaffna in 1931, arguing that the Donoughmore reforms did not concede enough self-government. In the 1930s the youth leagues were formed in the South, around a core of intellectuals who had returned from education in Britain. Influenced by leftist ideals, the ministers of the CNC petitioned the colonial government to increase the powers, instead of demanding independence, or even Dominion status. They were forced to withdraw their minister's memorandum, after a vigorous campaign by the youth leagues. The South Colombo Youth League became involved in a strike at the Wellawat spinning and weaving mills. It published an irregular journal in Sinhala, Kamkaruwa, Surya Mal movement, in protest against the proceeds of poppy sales on Armistice Day being used for the benefit of the British ex-servicemen to the detriment of Sri Lankan ex-servicemen. One of the latter, Elian Pereira, had started a rival sale of Surya flowers on this day, the proceeds of which were devoted to help needy Ceylonese ex-servicemen. In 1933 a British teacher, Doreen Young Wickramasinghe, wrote an article, The Battle of the Flowers, which appeared in the Ceylon Daily News and criticized the practice of forcing Sri Lankan school children to purchase poppies to help British veterans at the expense of their own, which caused her to be vilified by her compatriots. The South Colombo Youth League now got involved in the Surya Mal movement and revived it on a new anti-imperialist and anti-war basis. Yearly until the Second World War, Young men and women sold suyu flowers on the streets on Armistice Day in competition with the poppy sellers. The purchasers of the suyu mal were generally from the poorer sections of society, and the funds collected were not large, but the movement provided a rallying point for the anti-imperialist-minded youth of the time. An attempt was made by the British colonial authorities to curb the movement's effectiveness through the Street Collection Regulation Ordinance. Doreen Young was elected first president of the suyu mal movement at a meeting held at the residence of Wilmot Pereira in Harana. Terence De Silva and Robin Ratnam were elected joint secretaries, and Roy de Mel treasurer. Malaria epidemic and floods. There had been a drought in 1934 which caused a shortage of rice, estimated at 3 million bushels. From October on there were floods, followed by a malaria epidemic in 1934-35, during which 1 million people were affected and at least 125,000 died. The suyu mal movement was honed by volunteer work among the poor during the malaria epidemic and the floods. The volunteers found that there was widespread malnutrition, which was aggravated by the shortage of rice, and which reduced resistance to the disease. They helped fight the epidemic by making pills of Marmite yeast extract. Philip Gunawardena and N.M. Pereira came to be known as Avasawal Pilipua and Amp Parapua Mahadai because of the lentils he distributed as dry rations to the people affected in those days. As Sybil described in Forward the Progressive Weekly many years later, work in connection with malaria relief was an eye-opener to many of these people who were just getting to know the peasant masses. The poverty was incredible, the overcrowding even more so. 15, 20 or more people crammed into tiny huts, dying like flies. This was what colonial exploitation meant, worse than the worst that prevailed in England when Marx and Engels analyzed the conditions of the working classes. This was what had to be fought. The Lanka Sama Samaha Party is formed. The Marxist Lanka Sama Samaha Party, which grew out of the youth leagues in 1935, was the first party to demand independence. The first manifesto of the Lanka Sama Samaha Party declared that its aims were the achievement of complete national independence, the nationalization of the means of production, distribution and exchange, and the abolition of inequalities arising from differences of race, caste, creed or gender. Its deputies in the State Council after the 1936 general election, N.M. Pereira and Philip Gunawardena, and the other leaders Leslie Gunawadeen and Colvin R. De Silva were aided in this struggle by not quite so radical members like Don Alwan Rajapaksa of Ruhuna and Kana Tazara of the Indian Tamils. Others who supported them from time to time were Georgie De Silva of Kandy, B.H. Aluwihare of Mattel, D.P. Jayus Uriya of Gampaha, A. Ratnayake of Damara, and Susantha de Fonseca, Deputy Speaker. They also demanded the replacement of English as the official language by Sinhala and Tamil. In November 1936, motions that, in the municipal and police courts of the island, the proceedings should be in the vernacular, and that entries in police stations should be recorded in the language in which they are originally stated, were passed by the State Council and referred to the legal secretary. But nothing was done about these matters, and English continued to be the language of rule until 1956. Fraternal relations were established between the LSSP and the Congress Socialist Party of India, and an LSSP delegation attended the Firozpur sessions of the Indian National Congress in 1936. In April 1937, Kamaladevi Chattopadhyaya, a leader of the CSP, addressed a large number of meetings in various parts of the country on a national tour organized by the LSSP. This helped to establish the indivisibility of the fights for independence of Sri Lanka and India. In Jaffna, where Kamaladevi also spoke, the left movement found consistent and loyal supporters from among one-time members of the JYC. Bracegirdle on 28 November 1936, at a meeting in Colombo, the president of the LSSP, Dr. Inusia da Silva, introduced Mark Anthony Bracegirdle, a British-Australian former planter, saying, "This is the first time a white comrade has ever attended a party meeting held at a street corner." He made his first public speech in Sri Lanka, warning that the capitalists were trying to split the workers of Sri Lanka and put one against the other. He took an active part in organizing a public meeting called by the LSSP on Gallface Green in Colombo on 10 January 1937 to celebrate Sir Herbert D'Aubigon's departure from the island and to protest against the atrocities during his tenure as Inspector General of Police. In March, he was co-opted to serve on the executive committee. He was employed by Natazaraya, member of the State Council from the Hattin constituency, to organize an estate labor federation in en.wikipedia or Hattin, with an idea that he may be a proper candidate to be the future secretary of the Labour Federation. On 3 April, at a meeting at en.wikipedia attended by 2,000 estate workers, at which Kamaladevi Chattopadhyaya spoke, Dr. N.M. Pereira said, "Comrades, I have an announcement to make. You know we have a white comrade. He has generously consented to address you. I call upon Comrade Bracegirdle to address you." Bracegirdle rose to speak amid tumultuous applause and shouts of "Say me, say me." The authorities were on hand to note his speech. The most noteworthy feature of this meeting was the presence of Bracegirdle and his attack on the planters. He claimed unrivaled knowledge of the misdeeds of the planters and promised scandalous exposures. His delivery, facial appearance, his posture were all very threatening. Every sentence was punctuated with cries of "Say me" from the laborers. Laborers were heard to remark that Mr. Bracegirdle has correctly said that they should not allow planters to break labor laws and they must in future not take things lying down. The British planters were angry that the prestige was being harmed by a fellow white man. They prevailed upon the British colonial governor Sir Reginald Stubbs to deport him. Bracegirdle was served with the order of deportation on the 22nd of April and given 48 hours to leave on the SS Multan, on which a passage had been booked for him by the government. The LSSP, with Bracegirdle's assent, decided that the order should be defied. Bracegirdle went into hiding and the colonial government began an unsuccessful manhunt. LSSP started a campaign to defend him. At that year's May Day rally at Price Park, placards declaring, "We want Bracegirdle, deport Stubbs" were displayed, and a resolution was passed condemning Stubbs, demanding his removal and the withdrawal of the deportation order. On 5 May, in the State Council, Nanomita Pereira and Philip Gunawardena moved a vote of censure on the governor for having ordered the deportation of Bracegirdle without the advice of the acting Home Minister. Even the Board of Ministers had started feeling the heat of public opinion and the vote was passed by 34 votes to 7. On the same day there was a 50,000-strong rally at Gallface Green, which was presided over by Colvin da Silva and addressed by Dr. N.M. Pereira, Philip Gunawardena, Leslie Gunawardena, A.E. Gunasinya, Georgie da Silva, D.M. Rajapakse, Siripala Samarakadi, Vernon Gunasakara, Handi Parambanayagam, Mrs. K. Natazara and Swrd Bandaranaike. Bracegirdle made a dramatic appearance on the platform at this rally, but the police were powerless to arrest him. However, the police managed to arrest him a couple of days later at the Hufstorp residence of Vernon Gunasakera, the secretary of the LSSP. However, the necessarily legal preparations had been made. A writ of habeas corpus was served and the case was called before a bench of 3 Supreme Court judges presided over by Chief Justice Sir Sidney Abrahams. The brilliant H.V. Pereira, the county's leading civil lawyer, volunteered his services free on behalf of Bracegirdle. He was made a Queen's Counsel on the day that Bracegirdle appeared in court. On May 18, order was made that he could not be deported for exercising his right to free speech, and Bracegirdle was a free man.